Mace Windu's fate is one of the longest-running unsolved mysteries in Star Wars, and after 20 years, canon still refuses to settle it. His fall from the Chancellor's office looked final, yet nothing about that night has ever been confirmed, despite countless opportunities to do so. George Lucas left the question open. Lucasfilm has preserved that ambiguity ever since, and Samuel L. Jackson remains adamant that his character survived. The evidence surrounding those final moments reveals exactly why this debate has persisted for 2 decades and why the answer may not be what fans have always assumed. In a recent appearance on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, Jackson laid out his case once again, arguing that his take on Mace's survival isn't controversial at all.
Just because they cut my arm off and I fell out a window doesn't mean I'm dead. Yeah.
He even referenced his iconic character Jules Winfield from Pulp Fiction, joking that the 2 survivors might be wandering the galaxy together somewhere.
Yeah, he's out there. Yeah, he's out there walking the earth with Jules.
Yeah. Additionally, what makes this argument more than wishful thinking is the conversation that started the entire debate. Over a decade after Revenge of the Sith, Jackson revealed that he had asked George Lucas directly whether Mace survived the fall, and Lucas did not shut it down. Instead, he told Jackson that he was okay with that possibility, and that Mace could be alive. That single exchange opened a door that has never been closed, which means the creator of Star Wars himself left room for the character's return. Mace's chances of survival become clearer when the confrontation in Palpatine's office is examined closely. The sequence of events points to a remarkable detail that often gets overlooked. Mace Windu won his lightsaber duel with Darth Sidious. He didn't just hold off the Sith Lord, but achieved outright victory over the most dangerous darkseid user the galaxy had ever seen. And what had happened moments before in that very same room puts this in perspective. Palpatine had cut down 3 Jedi Masters in mere seconds, with Agen Kohler falling first, Saesee Tiin following immediately, and Kit Fisto lasting only slightly longer before succumbing as well. These weren't ordinary Jedi, but council members and experienced warriors who had endured countless engagements throughout the Clone Wars, and yet Sidious dispatched them as if they posed no real threat. Facing this same opponent, Mace not only stood his ground, but pushed forward until he eventually disarmed the Sith Lord and backed him toward the window with a blade at his throat. George Lucas even confirmed in Revenge of the Sith's director commentary that Mace was overpowering Palpatine during their duel, and the novelization establishes that Mace's mastery of Vaapad gave him a unique edge against the Sith Lord. This matters significantly when evaluating the events that followed, because it establishes that Mace was operating at the absolute peak of his abilities at that moment. Yet even at this peak, Mace couldn't account for what happened next. Anakin arrived to find Mace preparing to execute the Sith Lord, and when Mace declared Palpatine too dangerous to remain alive, Anakin made his fateful choice by severing the Jedi Master's sword hand with his own lightsaber. The moment Mace lost his weapon, Palpatine dropped any pretense of weakness, rose to his feet, and hit the disarmed Jedi with force lightning that sent him crashing through the window and out into the stormy Coruscant sky. This is where most assume Mace met his end, but the evidence tells a different story when examined closely, starting with the lightning itself. Counting through the scene frame by frame reveals that Mace was exposed to the blast for approximately 6 seconds before going through the glass. That sounds devastating, but other characters have survived far worse under similar circumstances. Luke Skywalker, after all, endured Palpatine's lightning for over 20 seconds in Return of the Jedi, suffering multiple sustained bursts that left him convulsing and barely conscious on the throne room floor. Yet despite that prolonged assault, Luke not only survived, but retained enough strength afterward to drag his father across the entire hangar bay to a shuttle. By comparison, the lightning that supposedly ended Mace was far shorter in duration, and if Luke could survive 20 seconds, then 6 seconds of exposure raises serious questions about whether that alone could have proven fatal to someone of Mace's exceptional power level. Adding to this analysis is what Mace demonstrated just moments earlier in that same confrontation. During the duel, before Anakin's intervention, Mace blocked Palpatine's lightning with his lightsaber and redirected that energy back at the Sith Lord with such tremendous force that it permanently scarred and deformed Palpatine's face. If Mace could channel and redirect lightning while armed, his body clearly possessed some capacity to handle that type of destructive power, which suggests he may have had internal defenses against electrical damage that other Force users lack entirely. But what about the fall itself? This presents both the biggest challenge to survival and, surprisingly, the most hope for it. Palpatine's office sat in 500 Republica, one of the tallest residential towers on Coruscant, with the building standing at roughly 1,000 stories above the planet's surface levels. A straight, uninterrupted fall from that height would mean dropping nearly 2 miles before impact, which, under normal circumstances, would prove fatal regardless of Force ability or physical conditioning. However, the planet isn't empty space between buildings, but an ecumenopolis, a city-covered world. According to Star Wars Complete Locations, Coruscant's cityscape extends 5,127 levels deep, with structures built on top of structures and platforms extending at every altitude. As for 500 Republica itself, Matthew Stover's Revenge of the Sith novelization describes it as the most exclusive address on Coruscant, while James Luceno's Labyrinth of Evil depicts it as a mountainous structure over 1,000 stories tall that housed senators, celebrities, and the galaxy's wealthiest individuals. The sky lanes around such a prestigious building would have been particularly congested at all hours. This geography changes the survival question, because falling from that window didn't mean plummeting through a void. It meant falling through one of the busiest airspaces in the entire galaxy, a crowded, three-dimensional highway stretching from the top of the city to its depths, where the descent could potentially be interrupted at countless points by passing vehicles, landing platforms, or architectural features extending from nearby structures. The most overlooked evidence supporting this possibility comes from the scene's audio itself. When Mace goes through the window, he makes a distinct sound, and listening carefully reveals a grunt or yell that's clearly audible. This detail matters far more than most realize, because unconscious people don't vocalize, and neither do those who have already succumbed to their injuries. That sound confirms Mace was still conscious and fully aware as he began his descent, which means he had the capacity to act during the fall and potentially save himself. His body language reinforces this interpretation, as he appears tense and reactive, rather than limp and lifeless while exiting the frame, with his muscles engaged and his body clearly responding to what's happening, rather than falling like dead weight. If Mace remained conscious during the fall, several specific survival mechanisms become plausible, each aligning perfectly with established canon. The speeder traffic scenario is the most straightforward of these possibilities. If Mace remained aware during the fall, multiple intervention options existed within that congested airspace. He could have landed on a passing speeder, grabbed onto one as it flew beneath him, or used the Force to pull a nearby vehicle toward his trajectory. Any of these options would have been painful and potentially caused serious injuries, but they would have stopped his descent long before reaching the surface miles below. This exact scenario has direct precedent in canon that proves the concept works. During the chase scene in Attack of the Clones, Obi-Wan Kenobi fell through Coruscant's skylanes after the assassin droid he was clinging to was destroyed, plummeting for a considerable distance through the busy airspace until Anakin swooped in and intercepted him with a speeder at the last possible moment. What's notable here is that the fall didn't harm Obi-Wan at all once it was interrupted, as he landed in the vehicle and continued the chase immediately. This clearly demonstrates that Coruscant's dense traffic can effectively serve as a safety net for falling Jedi under the right circumstances. And if Obi-Wan could survive such a fall through speeder intervention, Mace certainly could as well. The Force-assisted landing scenario draws on abilities that Jedi have demonstrated throughout canon material over the years. Telekinesis can slow falls by pushing against air or nearby surfaces, creating resistance that reduces speed during descent. While Force users can also redirect their momentum and control their trajectory to some degree, effectively steering themselves towards safer landing spots rather than simply dropping straight down. The key point here is that Mace wouldn't have needed to stop himself completely in midair to survive. since that kind of sustained hovering would be extraordinarily difficult even for him. But even partial deceleration would have changed the outcome dramatically, as slowing from terminal velocity to half that speed would make the difference between fatal impact and survivable injuries. Given Mace's exceptional power level, which Canon consistently identifies as second only to Yoda in the entire Order, he would have had Force reserves available that most other Jedi simply couldn't match under similar circumstances. In addition to that, the architectural intervention scenario also relies on Coruscant's unique structural density rather than active Force use. Mace didn't necessarily need to survive a fall all the way to the ground to walk away from that night, but simply needed to intercept something on the way down, whether that meant grabbing a ledge as he fell past it, landing on a platform extending from a nearby building, or impacting a lower structure at an angle that distributed the Force across his body rather than concentrating it in a single devastating blow. Any of these outcomes would have caused injuries, possibly quite severe ones depending on the speed and angle of impact, but they wouldn't necessarily prove fatal for someone with Force-enhanced durability who could partially control their landing through telekinesis. What makes these scenarios even more compelling is what didn't happen in the aftermath. The Empire spent years systematically hunting every Jedi survivor across the galaxy following Order 66, with Vader personally tracking Force sensitives while the Inquisitors scoured the Outer Rim for anyone who escaped the initial purge. Yet despite this thorough campaign, no source in canon mentions anyone recovering Mace Windu's remains from the lower levels of Coruscant, and no confirmation of his fate was ever issued. For such an important figure who had just defeated the Emperor himself in combat, that silence is highly unusual. If Mace had fallen to his end that night, the Empire would have had every reason to recover and display his body as proof that the Jedi's greatest warrior had been vanquished. The fact that no such confirmation ever emerged suggests that canon is intentionally preserving ambiguity about what actually happened, leaving room for the possibility that Mace intercepted his fall through one of these very mechanisms and disappeared into the depths of Coruscant before anyone could find him. Aside from that, understanding whether Mace could have survived also requires assessing what made him different from other Jedi, because he possessed abilities that set him apart from nearly everyone else in the Order and gave him tools for survival that most Force users simply didn't have access to. Again, as Jackson correctly highlighted, Mace was the second most powerful Jedi in the universe, ranking just below Yoda in terms of raw Force ability and combat prowess. Canon material supports this assessment consistently, showing Mace seated on the Jedi Council as one of its most senior members, commanding respect from even Yoda himself on matters of strategy and wartime decisions, and spending decades refining his connection to the Force in ways that made him extraordinarily capable. The implication here is straightforward. If any Jedi in the entire Order could survive through sheer Force power alone, it would be someone operating at Mace's exceptional level. But raw power wasn't what made Mace truly unique, as that distinction belongs to Vaapad. Vaapad was a lightsaber form that Mace created himself alongside another Jedi named Sora Bulk, and it stood apart from the other 7 forms of combat because it required channeling inner darkness rather than suppressing it. Practitioners drew on aggressive emotions and fed on the raw energy of conflict itself to fuel their movements and strikes, which is precisely why the Jedi Council had forbidden Form 7 study for most members. Jedi who touched the dark side through combat forms often fell to corruption entirely, making the technique extraordinarily dangerous for anyone who attempted it. Yet Mace mastered Vaapad without falling. He walked the razor edge between light and dark with every single fight, channeling darkness while firmly remaining anchored to the light side through mental discipline that most Jedi couldn't even imagine attempting. This balance suggests a level of self-control and Force mastery that few beings in galactic history ever achieved. And more importantly for our question, it means that if survival required tapping into reserves of will and power beyond normal limits, Mace had access to depths that most Jedi simply couldn't reach. Beyond Vaapad, Mace also possessed another rare ability called Shatterpoint, which allowed him to perceive fault lines and breaking points in situations, people, and objects around him. He could see critical moments where everything could change in an instant and identify weak points where a single precise action could shift outcomes entirely. The Clone Wars animated series depicts Mace's tactical brilliance repeatedly, and much of that seemingly supernatural battlefield awareness came directly from his ability to perceive what others couldn't see. The application of Shatterpoint to his survival scenario is direct. If a path to safety existed during those critical seconds of falling, this ability would have revealed it instantly. Whether it was a speeder trajectory he could intercept, a platform below he could reach, or a precise moment where using the Force could change his fate, Mace would have known immediately if survival was possible, and exactly what actions he needed to take. No other falling Jedi would have possessed this advantage. Moreover, Jackson's comment about Jedi being able to float wasn't merely a joke for television audiences either, because telekinesis is a well-documented ability that can slow falls and redirect momentum. We've seen Force users push against surfaces throughout canon, slowing their descents and controlling their movement through the air with remarkable precision. Cal Kestis, in the Jedi video games for instance, regularly uses Force slow to survive falls that should otherwise prove fatal. Yet his power level sits far below what Mace possessed at the height of his abilities. The logic follows naturally. If a surviving Padawan still reconnecting with the Force could manage these techniques, a master of Mace's caliber could certainly accomplish the same with far greater effectiveness. Then there's Tutaminis, a Force ability that allows users to absorb and redirect energy through the body. Mace demonstrated this capability directly during his duel with Palpatine, channeling lightning through his blade and sending it back with such devastating effect that the redirected energy scarred the Sith Lord permanently. A Jedi with that level of energy manipulation might well possess internal defenses against electrical damage that other Force users lack, which could explain how he endured the lightning blast before going through the window. Taken together, these abilities paint a picture of someone uniquely equipped for survival. Vaapad gave him mental discipline and access to power beyond normal limits, while Shatterpoint would have revealed any available path to safety. His raw power level meant he possessed Force reserves most couldn't match. Telekinesis could slow his descent through the crowded Coruscant airspace, and Tutaminis suggested resistance to the very energy that struck him. No other Jedi in the Order possessed this exact combination of capabilities, which means that if anyone could survive what happened that night, it was Mace Windu specifically. Beyond Mace's individual abilities, Star Wars itself has established a clear pattern when it comes to seemingly fatal situations. Characters survive far more often than logic would suggest. This pattern has repeated so many times across the franchise that it's becoming almost expected, and the examples throughout canon make Mace's potential survival fit within established storytelling conventions rather than breaking them. Star Wars has established that characters can survive far worse, and the franchise is filled with examples that put Mace's situation into perspective. Darth Maul, for instance, was cut in half at the waist by Obi-Wan Kenobi and fell down a reactor shaft on Naboo, injuries that should have been instantly fatal by any reasonable measure. Yet, he returned in the Clone Wars after surviving for years on a junk planet called Lothal Minor, kept alive through sheer hatred and his connection to the dark side. Anakin Skywalker's fate on Mustafar was equally horrific, as he lost 3 limbs and burned alive on the banks of a lava river, with injuries so severe that Obi-Wan left him for dead without hesitation. The revelation a decade later that Anakin had survived shocked Obi-Wan, despite having witnessed the injuries firsthand. Moreover, Palpatine himself endured his own reflected lightning for approximately 15 seconds during that very duel, far longer than the 6 seconds Mace suffered, was thrown down an exploding reactor shaft in what appeared to be certain death in Return of the Jedi, only for the Rise of Skywalker to reveal he had survived. If Obi-Wan could be wrong about Anakin's fate after watching him burn alive, and Palpatine could survive both extended lightning exposure and an exploding reactor core, then Mace surviving a fall through Coruscant's trafficked airspace seems entirely plausible. However, while the evidence strongly supports survival, intellectual honesty demands addressing the counterarguments and acknowledging the genuine challenges Mace faced that night. The physical trauma was severe and shouldn't be minimized. If Mace fell all the way to Coruscant's lower levels without any interruption, that drop would almost certainly prove fatal regardless of force ability. The lightning could have caused cardiac arrest or severe muscle seizure, potentially leaving him physically unable to act during the descent, even if he remained mentally aware. The amputation of his hand added immediate shock and significant blood loss to his already compromised condition. And the combination of all of these traumas occurring simultaneously might have overwhelmed even someone operating at his exceptional power level. Beyond the physical obstacles, there's also the psychological dimension to account for. Mace had just experienced one of the most devastating betrayals in Jedi history, as the young man he had reluctantly trained and mentored for over a decade chose to side with the Sith Lord over him. That kind of emotional trauma can affect even the strongest minds, potentially disrupting the concentration needed to execute force techniques during a desperate fall. Mace had also just discovered that Palpatine, whom the Jedi Council had trusted and worked alongside for years, had been the Phantom Sith Lord manipulating the entire Clone Wars from within the Republic's highest office. The weight of failure, realizing he had walked past the enemy countless times without sensing the truth, may have shaken his confidence in ways that affected his ability to respond in those critical seconds. The narrative function of his apparent end also presents challenges to survival theories. His fall served specific story purposes within the larger saga, marking Anakin's point of no return on his path to becoming Vader, while enabling Palpatine's rise to absolute power without meaningful Jedi opposition. If Mace survived, difficult questions immediately arise that the story has never attempted to answer. Why didn't he intervene during the Empire's 2 decades of tyrannical rule? Or, better yet, why didn't he attempt to contact Yoda or Obi-Wan, both of whom survived the Purge and went into hiding on remote worlds? However, these questions have potential answers that actually strengthen the survival theory rather than weaken it. Mace may have recognized that his direct involvement in Anakin's fall made him uniquely unsuited to confront Vader, since any encounter would force both men to relive that traumatic moment in Palpatine's office. He may have sensed through the Force that the galaxy's liberation would come through Luke Skywalker, rather than through the old guard of the Jedi Order, and that his interference could disrupt that destiny. Most compellingly, Mace may have concluded that the Jedi's aggressive approach to the Sith, the very approach he championed by attempting to execute Palpatine rather than arrest him, had contributed to the Order's destruction. Going into exile to meditate on these failures would align perfectly with how Yoda and Obi-Wan responded to the same catastrophe. These counter-arguments don't definitively prove Mace is gone, but they do explain why canon hasn't confirmed his survival, despite having numerous opportunities to do so over the past 2 decades. What makes the question so compelling is the official position on Mace Windu's fate, which is notable precisely because there isn't one. Lucasfilm has maintained intentional ambiguity since Revenge of the Sith premiered in 2005, refusing to close the door despite countless chances to do so. Moreover, recent developments suggest that flexibility may finally be getting used. Reports from Empire magazine reveal that Jackson has moved beyond public advocacy into active lobbying behind closed doors at Disney. Additionally, director Bryce Dallas Howard confirmed on the Happy Sad Confused podcast that after Jackson expressed interest in working with her, she went straight to Dave Filoni and asked directly about Mace Windu's fate. The fact that a Star Wars director has actively discussed bringing back the character with Lucasfilm's chief creative officer transforms this from mere fan speculation into a practical possibility at the studio level. These aren't rumors from anonymous sources anymore, but confirmed conversations happening among the people who actually make decisions about Star Wars content. On the other hand, Lucasfilm's continued silence stands in sharp contrast to how the studio handles characters whose fates are truly settled. Qui-Gon Jinn's funeral pyre left no room for doubt about his physical fate, while Padme Amidala's body was displayed in an open casket during her funeral procession. Even characters who returned from apparent demise, like Palpatine and Maul, eventually received explicit canonical confirmation of their survival. For Mace alone, the studio has maintained 2 decades of intentional ambiguity, neither confirming his end nor revealing his survival, which suggests they're preserving the option for a reason. After examining every angle of this question, did Mace Windu actually survive that fateful night above Coruscant? His mastery of the Force, proven resilience, and the precedents set by others who survived similar situations all point toward a strong possibility. Perhaps someday a new project will finally settle the question once and for all, confirming whether one of the most powerful Jedi who ever lived actually died that night or found a way to survive. But while we wait for canon to settle that mystery, Mace's confrontation with Palpatine revealed something fascinating about both warriors and the weapons they wielded that's worth exploring further. To discover why every Jedi and even Darth Vader despised Palpatine's lightsaber and what it says about the Sith Lord's true nature, watch the video on the left. Or, if you want to see how another warrior surpassed even the most powerful Force users in the galaxy, watch our breakdown of why Starkiller is more powerful than anyone else on the right.